Hey, this is Daryl Henry, and this video is what insurance do service providers for the intellectually and developmentally disabled need. First, I'm going to explain to you why you need specialized insurance. Then, I'm going to talk you through the core coverages that you should be evaluating your program. And lastly, I'll talk you through some optional ones, not to be confused with unimportant, just optional. So, first off, why you need specialized insurance. And the simple answer is what you do is very different from a standard Main Street business. You are transporting vulnerable people with needs. There's risks of accusations of lack of care and sexual misconduct. You're dealing with sensitive healthcare records. You're a quasi healthcare organization. So, the standard liability policies that you buy just don't have everything that you need. And on top of that, there's not a whole lot of brokers that work with service providers for the intellectually and developmentally disabled, and not every company has a program uniquely designed for you, which means what you need is somebody with a lot of expertise in your space with an insurance company that also provides insurance to a lot of programs like yourself. Okay, let me talk you through 9 core coverages that you should be evaluating from the moment you open your doors. First, property insurance. If you own a building, you need to insure the buildings. If you have desks, chairs, equipment, anything like that, you need to make sure that you're insuring that or at least know what you're not insuring. A lot of service providers will start out providing support services to people in their homes. It's similar to a home health agency, honestly. But organizations like that don't tend to have much in the way of equipment, so that they don't really get all that concerned about that particular line of coverage. On the other hand, if you're a group home and you own the building, that building is a very important asset. You need to make sure that it's insured properly. So, property insurance is very important. The next 3 coverages, so 2, 3, and 4, I want to talk about together because you should be buying them bundled together on one policy in an ideal situation. First is general liability insurance, and that protects you for bodily injury and property damage that you may cause to other people or organizations. Now, the thing is, service providers provide care to people with disabilities. That's obvious, it's in the name, right? But general liability insurance does not cover professional liability and it does not cover abuse and molestation. So, putting some scenarios out there. Let's say that one of your employees takes a couple people to the mall and then loses track of one of your clients at the mall. Well, the family may be a little upset that you lost track of their loved one. And that is not bodily injury, that's not property damage. That is lack of care. That is professional liability. So the lines between general liability and professional liability with what you do can get very blurred. Or thinking about a group home, okay? So let's say that one of the residents is walking around upstairs and then falls down the stairs, trips over some carpet. Well, is that general liability? Is that bodily injury due to a premises? Or was that lack of supervision? Was that lack of care? That line between those 2 coverages is very, very blurred, which makes it very important to buy them together. And then the third thing, so abuse and molestation liability insurance, it can get very blurred whether it is a professional liability claim or abuse and molestation liability claim. So if one of your employees develops a relationship with one of your clients and has some type of sexual affair, it happens. Is that lack of supervision? Is that lack of care? Or is that sexual abuse? Really, it's a little bit of both, right? Which is why you don't want 2 companies offering those 2 coverages. You ideally want one company that handles both of those lines because the last thing you want is 2 companies finger pointing with each other. The next coverage you need to consider is workers' compensation insurance. If you have paid employees, even contractors that you're using that don't carry their own workers' compensation insurance, you have a risk there. So let me tell you what I see a lot. I'll see an organization, once again, going back to a service provider that's providing personal support in a client's home. And they will work with caregivers that want to be contractors. They do not want to be employees. Well, if that contractor that wants to work for four different agencies doesn't have their own workers' compensation insurance and gets hurt on your job, that is still your responsibility as the employer to provide workers' compensation insurance. The rules for you to get out of paying that claim are really stacked against you. So, workers' compensation for you as an organization is important both for W 2 employees and for the 1099 contractors that don't have their own workers' compensation insurance. The next line of coverage you need to be considering is commercial auto insurance. It's pretty straightforward if you own a vehicle. State of Maryland requires you to have auto insurance, and I think most states in America require you to have auto insurance, at least liability insurance on that vehicle. Now, what I find many times when I'm working with service providers, if they're not working with somebody that's got specialized expertise in the space, is I'll pick up a policy and I'll see that they have $30,000 of bodily injury coverage, which, if you just think about one van with five people in it, it gets into a vehicle accident, how far do you think $30,000 will go in that situation? Not very far. So I always recommend that people carry at least $1 million on auto liability insurance. But even if you don't own vehicles, you probably have caregivers that are driving their personal vehicles on behalf of the business, maybe even transporting clients, which is pretty risky in and of itself. You need to make sure you're taking the proper controls there so that you're protecting both the caregiver and the organization. But hired and non-owned auto insurance becomes very important if people are going to drive their personal vehicles on behalf of the organization. The next line of coverage you need to think about, especially if you're nonprofit or if you're a for-profit with multiple owners and stakeholders, is directors and officers liability insurance. So all the general liability and professional liability and abuse and molestation liability coverages that you're looking at have to do with somebody getting hurt or breaking something. It's very physical. Directors and officers insurance has to do with how you run the business and how you run the assets of the organization. So if you have one owner that goes back to the other owner and says, "Hey, you ran the business into the dirt and now I lost a lot of money because of it," that is a directors and officers liability claim. The most common scenario that I'm contacted for directors and officers liability insurance is for nonprofits. A board of directors will go to the executive director and say, "Hey, am I covered?" And I always have to have the conversation with people that if the directors and officers are covered, it's not about if they're covered many times, it's what type of lawsuit are we talking about? Because for general liability insurance, directors and officers of the corporation are considered insureds, and the insurance company will pay for the lawyer and pay for the settlement, and you're fine there. What you need to look at for directors and officers insurance is it's how you spent the money. So a lot of board members many times will say, well, we want directors and officers insurance because they're looking at the line of coverage that has directors and officers on it. But it's not about the name of the policy, it's about the type of lawsuit. That's what dictates what type of insurance you buy. So after that, you need to think about employment practices liability insurance. If you're going to have employees, sometimes employees sue you for wrongful hiring, firing, retaliation, all these different types of employment lawsuits. And those lawyers are very expensive. And in America, many states, it's at will. You can fire for any reason. But on the same token, people can sue you for any reason. And the only type of people in America that really aren't protected are white males under the age of 40. Everybody else can sue for age, race, uh, creed, gender, all kinds of different things. So if you're going to have employees, you need to think about the scenario if one of them thinks you fired them wrongfully. The next coverage you need to think about as a core coverage is cyber liability insurance. And I really emphasize cyber insurance with service providers because you are a quasi healthcare organization. You have a lot of healthcare records on file for your clients, which means if you are breached, you're going to have to pay for letters, credit monitoring services and damages that can happen as a result of that data breach. And the data that you have on file is more valuable than other types of records, which can make it much more expensive to manage a claim. Now let's move on to some of the optional but valuable coverages for service providers. First, business interruption coverage. I think this line of coverage, it really depends on what type of services you're providing. If you're providing personal care support, meaning you're going into someone's home, I don't think it matters all that much if something happens to your office. You just pick up and go to a different office. Now, on the other hand, if you're providing day support services or you're running group homes, those locations are specially zoned and licensed for the type of work that you do, which means if there's a fire in that space, you cannot easily move, which means that there's going to be a fire. The first thing you're going to do is make sure that there's money for your stuff to repair the space and repair the building. But the next thing you're going to be thinking about is, do I have enough money to pay my employees and cover my net income while I'm not operating? And that's what business income and extra expense coverage can protect you for. The next optional but important coverage would be fidelity bonds or employee dishonesty coverage. This gets into money and money being stolen from the organization. And there's a number of different ways that money gets stolen. First is cash or credit cards. So an employee has access to a credit card and goes and buys $10,000 worth of stuff from Sam's and then sells it to fuel their drug habit. I saw that type of claim once. Fidelity bond or employee dishonesty coverage is going to pay to replace the money that was stolen. Or if you're providing in home support services, you'll want theft of client's property. So, this is if one of your caregivers goes into one of your clients' home and steals property from your clients. Maybe they steal jewelry, maybe they steal money, but it's your employees stealing from your clients. And then another way that money can be stolen from you is that a threat actor fools one of your employees into sending money out. That's computer fraud, that's social engineering. It's a quasi cyber coverage. So sometimes you get that coverage on a crime policy, sometimes you get it on a cyber policy. It all depends on how you want to structure things. A next optional but valuable coverage, well, it's not optional if you have them, but special event insurance. If you're a nonprofit, you might have golf tournaments, you might have 5Ks, you might have a special event, and you need to send a certificate of insurance to a local hotel where you're going to host a banquet or something of that nature. That's important to you because it's a big fundraiser. It's part of how you generate funds. Not every policy is going to automatically cover special event insurance. Although I'll say a lot of the companies that have specialized programs for organizations like yourself, they tend to offer special event coverage and it's baked into the policy. And the last optional but valuable coverage you should be thinking about as an organization is an umbrella. And this is really for as you grow. Organizations with a fleet of vehicles, with multiple homes, with multiple $1 million of revenue. One of the things that happens to you as you grow is the possibility of a larger lawsuit comes into play. I'll tell you, it's really not hard if you get 5 or 10 people in a van to have a lawsuit or damages that accumulate over $1 million of coverage. So for me, that's always a trigger to talk to people about umbrella coverage. I actually kind of have a checklist in my mind. When people ask me, do I need an umbrella? I'm wondering how prominent they are, how much they have in the way of assets. So will somebody think that there's money to be had? Do they have vehicles? Because vehicles are the fastest way you'll have a multi-million-dollar claim. And do you have high risk activities? And the truth of service providers is, yeah, it's always high risk. You're dealing with vulnerable people in vulnerable situations. So there's no way that the work you do is not risky. But if you're a smaller organization, or if you're just getting started, you may not necessarily want to pay for multi-million dollars of liability coverage. But as you grow, you start adding vehicles, you start adding locations, you start adding operations, You have to be honest with yourself. If somebody's looking at you, will they think that there is money to be had? And if that is the case, you should be thinking about umbrella coverage. All right. I hope that was helpful. That is the complete guide to insurance for service providers to the intellectually and developmentally disabled. If you want to talk to me about your program, my contact information is at my website, insuranceforentrepreneurs.net. And if this was helpful, please hit like and subscribe. It helps other people like you find the content and find the channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Go build something great.